I never thought a typical Tuesday night at La Belle Cuisine would turn my world upside down, but life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. My name's Sophia, and I've spent the last 5 years building this restaurant from the ground up. It's my pride and joy, though most of our patrons have no idea I'm the owner. I prefer to keep a low profile, blending in with the staff and observing the magic unfold each night. As I made my way through the dimly lit dining room, the familiar scents of seared steaks and freshly baked bread filled the air. The soft clink of silverware against porcelain plates and the low hum of conversation created a symphony I'd grown to love. It was the sound of people enjoying themselves, celebrating life's little moments over good food and even better company. I paused near the bar, taking in the scene. To my left, an elderly couple shared a bottle of red wine, their hands intertwined on the table as they spoke in hushed tones. Nearby, a group of friends erupted in laughter, probably sharing an inside joke or a funny story from their day. It's moments like these that remind me why I got into this business in the first place. As I continued my rounds, I caught sight of Marco, our head chef, peeking out from the kitchen. He gave me a quick thumbs up. Tonight's special was a hit. I smiled back, feeling a surge of pride. We'd spent weeks perfecting that dish, a delicate sea base with a lemon caper sauce that practically melted in your mouth. It was gratifying to see our hard work pay off. Just then, Sarah, one of our newer waitresses, approached me with a worried look on her face. "Sophia," she whispered, "table 12 is complaining about the wine. They're saying it's corked." I nodded, immediately switching into problem-solving mode. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it," I assured her, heading towards the table in question. As the owner, I could have easily delegated this task, but I believe in leading by example. Plus, I genuinely enjoy these interactions with our guests. The couple at table 12 looked up as I approached. The man, a distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, raised an eyebrow. "Are you the sommelier?" he asked, a hint of skepticism in his voice. I smiled warmly. "Not officially, but I know a thing or two about wine." "I heard you're having some trouble with yours." The woman, elegantly dressed in a navy blue dress, nodded. "It just doesn't taste right," she explained. "We've had this particular vintage before, and it's usually lovely." I picked up the bottle, examining the label. It was one of our more expensive selections, a Bordeaux from a particularly good year. I poured a small amount into a fresh glass and took a sniff. Immediately, I could detect the telltale musty odor of a corked wine. "You're absolutely right," I told them. "This bottle is corked. I'm so sorry about that. Let me bring you a fresh bottle right away, on the house of course." The couple's faces lit up. "Oh, that's very kind of you," the woman said. "We really appreciate it." As I headed to the wine cellar to select a replacement, I couldn't help but feel grateful for moments like these. It's the little things, a replaced bottle of wine, a complimentary dessert for a birthday celebration, or simply taking the time to chat with our regulars, that turn first-time visitors into loyal customers. I returned with the new bottle, presenting it to the couple and pouring a small amount for them to taste. The gentleman took a sip and smiled broadly. "Perfect," he declared. "Thank you for handling that so graciously." I was about to respond when a commotion near the entrance caught my attention. My heart sank as I recognized the voice, shrill, demanding, and unfortunately all too familiar. Vivian, my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law, had just walked in with 2 of her equally unpleasant friends. For a moment, I froze. Vivian didn't know I owned La Belle Cuisine. In fact, she had no idea I had any connection to the restaurant at all. As far as she was concerned, I was just a lowly waitress, struggling to make ends meet after her precious son had decided to leave me. The irony of the situation would have been amusing if it wasn't so infuriating. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was sure to be an interesting evening. Part of me wanted to retreat to the kitchen and let someone else deal with Vivian and her entourage. But I knew that wouldn't be fair to my staff. Besides, I had worked too hard to let someone like Vivian intimidate me in my own restaurant. As I watched the hostess lead them to their table, I couldn't help but notice how Vivian's eyes darted around the room, her lips pursed in a perpetual expression of disapproval. Her friends, both blonde and impeccably coiffed, mimicked her every move. It was like watching a flock of particularly judgmental parrots. "Is everything all right?" The gentle voice of the woman at table 12 pulled me back to reality. I realized I had been staring at Vivian's group for a bit too long. I plastered on my best professional smile. "Oh, yes, everything's fine. Just making sure all our guests are settled. Can I get you anything else?" As the couple assured me they were fine, I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was about to take an unexpected turn. Little did I know just how right I was. I made my way back to the bar, trying to keep myself busy and avoid catching Vivian's eye. But as I polished glasses and chatted with regulars, I couldn't help but steal glances at her table. She was holding court, gesturing dramatically as she spoke, her friends hanging on her every word. Knowing Vivian, she was probably complaining about the decor or criticizing the menu before even trying anything. Just then, Daniel, my restaurant manager and right-hand man, sidled up next to me. "Everything okay, boss?" he asked quietly. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I sighed, setting down the glass I'd been polishing a bit too vigorously. "See that table by the window? The one with the 3 women?" Daniel nodded, his eyes narrowing as he observed them. "Yeah, what about them?" "The one in the middle is my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law," I explained. "And she has no idea I own this place." Daniel's eyebrows shot up. "Oh boy," he muttered. "Want me to handle their table?" I was tempted to say yes, to hide in the kitchen for the rest of the night. But something in me rebelled against the idea. This was my restaurant, my domain. I wasn't going to let Vivian's presence change how I operated. "No," I said finally. "I'll deal with it. Just keep an eye out, okay? You know how she can be." Daniel nodded, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze before heading off to check on other tables. I took another deep breath, straightened my shirt, and started towards Vivian's table. It was time to face the music. As I approached, I could hear snippets of their conversation. "Really, the nerve of some people," Vivian was saying, her voice dripping with disdain. "You'd think in a place like this, they'd know how to properly set a table." I bit back a retort. Our table settings had been meticulously arranged, as they were every night. But there was no point in arguing with Vivian when she was in one of her moods. "Good evening, ladies," I said, forcing a smile. "Welcome to La Belle Cuisine. Can I start you off with some drinks?" Vivian's head snapped up, her eyes widening in recognition. For a split second, I saw surprise flicker across her face before it was replaced by her usual look of contempt. Well, she drawled, her lips curling into a smirk. "If it isn't Sophia. I had no idea you were working here." She turned to her friends, her voice laden with false sympathy. "This is my son's ex. Well, soon-to-be ex. You know how these things can drag on." I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my composure. "What can I get for you this evening?" I asked again, determined to keep things professional. Vivian's smirk grew wider. "Oh, I don't know," she said, her tone mockingly sweet. "What would you recommend for someone who's clearly fallen on hard times?" Her friends tittered, and I felt a flash of anger. But I swallowed it down, reminding myself that I was the owner of this establishment, even if Vivian didn't know it. I had nothing to prove to her. "Our wine list is excellent," I said calmly. "Or if you prefer, we have a wonderful selection of cocktails. The house specialty is particularly good." Vivian waved her hand dismissively. "Just bring us a bottle of your most expensive champagne," she said. "We're celebrating tonight." I nodded, jotting down the order. "Anything else?" I asked. "That's all for now," Vivian said, already turning back to her friends. "Run along now." As I walked away, I could hear them laughing, no doubt at my expense. But I held my head high. Let them laugh, I thought. They had no idea who they were dealing with. And something told me that before the night was over, they just might find out. As I made my way back to the bar, my mind was racing. Vivian's presence in my restaurant felt like a ticking time bomb, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this night was about to go spectacularly wrong. I busied myself with preparing their champagne order, hoping that if I just kept my head down and did my job, maybe, just maybe, we could get through this evening without incident. "Everything okay, Sophia?" Marco, our head chef, had poked his head out of the kitchen again. He must have noticed the tension in my shoulders. I forced a smile. Yeah, everything's fine. Just unexpected company. Marco raised an eyebrow, but didn't push further. That's one of the things I love about my team. They know when to ask questions and when to let things be. Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me, he said, disappearing back into the controlled chaos of the kitchen. I nodded gratefully, then turned my attention back to the champagne. It was a Dom Perignon, vintage 2008, a truly exquisite bottle that we usually reserved for special occasions. Part of me bristled at the thought of wasting it on Vivian and her cronies, but I reminded myself that they were still paying customers, regardless of my personal feelings. As I carefully popped the cork and poured the golden liquid into 3 flutes, I couldn't help but overhear snippets of conversation from nearby tables. The couple I'd helped earlier with the corked wine were deep in conversation, their heads bent close together. A few tables over, a group of young professionals were animatedly discussing their latest project, their enthusiasm infectious. This was what I loved about La Belle Cuisine, the way it brought people together, creating a space for connection and joy. But as I glanced over at Vivian's table, that warm feeling quickly evaporated. They were huddled together, whispering and giggling, occasionally throwing pointed looks in my direction. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever was coming next. Balancing the tray with the champagne flutes, I made my way back to their table. As I approached, Vivian's voice carried clearly across the room. Really, the service here is abysmal, she was saying, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. You'd think in a place like this, they'd know how to treat their guests properly. I felt my cheeks burn, but I kept my expression neutral as I set the tray down on their table. Your champagne, ladies, I said, carefully placing a flute in front of each of them. Is there anything else I can get for you? Vivian looked up at me, her eyes glittering with malice. Oh, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Tell me, Sophia, is this really the best you could do after the divorce? Waiting tables? I bit the inside of my cheek, willing myself to stay calm. I'm happy with my work here, Vivian, I said evenly. Now, would you like to see our menu? But Vivian wasn't done. She picked up her champagne flute, swirling the bubbling liquid as she looked around the restaurant with a critical eye. It's quaint, I suppose, she said, her tone making it clear that quaint was not a compliment. Though I must say, I expected better from a place with such lofty prices. Her friends tittered, clearly enjoying the show. I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on us, and I knew I had to diffuse the situation quickly. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, trying to keep my voice level. Is there something specific I can do to improve your experience? Vivian's eyes narrowed. You can start by fetching us some menus, she snapped. Unless that's too much for you to handle. I nodded, turning on my heel to fetch the menus. As I walked away, I could hear Vivian's stage whisper behind me. Can you believe how far she's fallen? And to think, she could have had it all if she'd just been a better wife to my Charles. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The urge to turn around and tell Vivian exactly who she was dealing with was almost overwhelming. But I knew that would only make things worse. Instead, I focused on my breathing, trying to center myself as I retrieved the menus from the hostess stand. When I returned to their table, Vivian and her friends were midway through their champagne, their voices growing louder with each sip. As I handed out the menus, Vivian grabbed my wrist, her bony fingers digging into my skin. Listen here, girl, she hissed, her breath hot against my ear. I know you think you're something special, but let me tell you, you're nothing. You're lucky to even have this job. So you better shape up and give us the service we deserve, or I'll have a word with your manager. Understood. I pulled my arm away, my heart pounding. For a moment, I was transported back to all those family dinners and holiday gatherings where Vivian had belittled and undermined me at every turn. But this wasn't her house, and I wasn't that scared, insecure girl anymore. I understand perfectly, Vivian, I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. I'll make sure you receive the exact level of service you deserve. Something in my tone must have caught her off guard, because Vivian's eyes widened slightly. But before she could respond, I turned to her friends. "Can I tell you about our specials this evening?" As I ran through the night's offerings, I could feel Vivian's glare boring into me. But I kept my focus on her companions, describing each dish with the passion and knowledge that came from working closely with our talented kitchen staff. When I finished, one of Vivian's friends, a woman with a severe blonde bob and too much Botox, cleared her throat. "The sea base sounds lovely," she said, almost apologetically. "I think I'll have that." The other friend nodded in agreement. "Make that too," she added. Vivian's scowl deepened. "I'll have the filet mignon," she snapped. "And make sure it's cooked properly. Medium rare means medium rare, not raw, and certainly not well done." I jotted down their orders, assuring them that everything would be prepared to their liking. As I turned to leave, Vivian called after me, "And bring us another bottle of champagne. Try not to take all night this time." I nodded, biting back a retort. As I made my way to the kitchen to put in their order, I caught sight of Daniel watching me from across the room. He raised an eyebrow in silent question, and I gave him a small nod. I was okay. For now. In the kitchen, I took a moment to collect myself. The hustle and bustle of the staff, the sizzle of pans, and the rhythmic chopping of vegetables, it all helped to ground me. This was my world, the one I had built from the ground up. I wasn't about to let Vivian's pettiness shake me. "Everything all right, boss?" Marco asked, glancing up from the dish he was plating. "You look like you've just gone 10 rounds with a particularly nasty food critic." I couldn't help but chuckle. "Something like that," I admitted. "Just a difficult customer. Nothing I can't handle." Marco nodded, his eyes twinkling. "Well, if you need me to accidentally spill something on anyone, just say the word." I laughed outright at that, feeling some of the tension leave my body. "Thanks, Marco, but I think we'd better stick to what we do best, serving amazing food." As I watched Marco and his team work their magic, I felt a renewed sense of pride. Every dish that left this kitchen was a testament to our hard work and passion. No matter what Vivian thought, I knew the truth. La Belle Cuisine was something special. With the orders placed, I returned to the dining room to check on my other tables. The elderly couple from earlier caught my eye, waving me over. "Everything is delightful, dear," the woman said, patting my hand. "You run a wonderful establishment." I thanked her, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. This was why I did what I did, for moments like these, when I could see the joy our food and atmosphere brought to people. But as I turned away, I caught sight of Vivian watching me, her eyes narrowed in suspicion. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head. She might not know I was the owner yet, but she was starting to realize there was more to my role here than she'd initially thought. I took a deep breath, straightening my shoulders. Let her wonder, I thought. The night was still young, and something told me we were just getting started. Whatever Vivian had in store, I was ready. This was my restaurant, my turf. And I wasn't about to back down without a fight. As the evening wore on, I found myself constantly on edge, my eyes darting to Vivian's table more often than I'd like to admit. The rest of the restaurant hummed with the usual Tuesday night energy, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. But for me, it all felt muted, overshadowed by the looming presence of my soon-to-be ex-mother-in-law. I was in the middle of recommending a wine pairing to a lovely couple celebrating their anniversary when I heard Vivian's voice rise above the ambient noise. "Excuse me. Waitress. We need service over here." I closed my eyes for a brief moment, taking a deep breath before turning to face her table. "I'll be right with you," I called, forcing a smile. To the anniversary couple, I said, "Please excuse me. I hope you enjoy your wine." As I made my way over to Vivian's table, I could feel the eyes of nearby diners on me. Vivian's voice had been loud enough to draw attention, and now people were watching curiously to see how the scene would unfold. "Yes, Vivian?" I asked as I reached their table, keeping my tone as neutral as possible. "How can I help you?" Vivian looked up at me, her eyes glittering with malice. "Finally," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've been waiting for ages. Is this how you treat all your customers, or are we getting special treatment because of our history?" I bit the inside of my cheek, willing myself to stay calm. I apologize for the wait, I said evenly. We're quite busy tonight. What can I get for you? But Vivian wasn't done. She leaned back in her chair, looking me up and down with a critical eye. You know, Sophia, she said, her voice carrying clearly to the surrounding tables, I always knew you'd end up in a place like this. Waiting tables, scrambling for tips. It's fitting, don't you think? Her friends tittered, and I felt a flush of anger rise in my cheeks. I was used to Vivian's jabs, but something about her attacking my profession, a profession she thought I had, struck a nerve. There's nothing wrong with waiting tables, Vivian, I said, my voice low but firm. It's honest work. Vivian's eyebrows shot up in mock surprise. Oh, of course not, she said, her tone sickeningly sweet. I'm sure it's very fulfilling for you. Now, be a good girl and fetch us another bottle of champagne. And do try to be quick about it this time. I nodded stiffly, turning on my heel to head towards the bar. As I walked away, I could hear Vivian's stage whisper to her friends. Can you believe Charles was actually going to marry her? Thank goodness he came to his senses. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. The urge to turn around and tell Vivian exactly who she was dealing with was almost overwhelming. But I held back, reminding myself that I had worked too hard to let someone like her get under my skin. At the bar, I took a moment to collect myself. Daniel, ever observant, sidled up next to me. Everything okay, boss? He asked quietly. I shook my head, a wry smile on my lips. Just Vivian being Vivian, I said. Nothing I can't handle. Daniel frowned, his eyes darting to Vivian's table. You know, you don't have to put up with this, he said. Say the word, and I'll have them out of here. For a moment, I was tempted. The thought of watching Vivian being escorted out of my restaurant was undeniably satisfying. But I knew that wasn't the right way to handle this. Thanks, Daniel, I said, patting his arm. But I need to deal with this myself. Just keep an eye out, okay? He nodded, giving me a supportive smile before heading off to check on other tables. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and picked up the fresh bottle of champagne. As I approached Vivian's table once more, I could see her watching me, a smirk playing on her lips. She was enjoying this, I realized. She thought she had the upper hand, that she was putting me in my place. Little did she know. Your champagne, ladies, I said, setting the bottle down and beginning to pour. As I filled Vivian's glass, she suddenly jerked her hand, causing the champagne to splash onto the tablecloth. Oh, she exclaimed, her voice filled with false concern. How clumsy of you, Sophia. You really should be more careful. I bit my tongue, reaching for my serving towel to dab at the spill. I'm sorry about that, I said, even though we both knew it wasn't my fault. Let me clean that up for you. As I leaned in to wipe the tablecloth, Vivian's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her manicured nails digging into my skin. Listen here, you little gold digger, she hissed, her voice low enough that only I could hear. You might have fooled Charles for a while, but I always saw right through you. You're nothing but a cheap waitress, and that's all you'll ever be. So do your job and stop pretending you're anything more than that. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was the weight of years of her snide comments and put-downs. Maybe it was the stress of the evening finally reaching its breaking point. Or maybe it was just the realization that I didn't have to take this anymore. Whatever it was, I felt a surge of strength coursing through me. I straightened up, looking Vivian directly in the eye. I think that's quite enough, Vivian, I said, my voice calm but firm. I've been nothing but professional with you this evening, despite your behavior. But I draw the line at being physically grabbed or verbally abused. If you can't treat the staff here with respect, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Vivian's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she seemed at a loss for words. Then her face contorted with anger. How dare you speak to me like that, she sputtered. Do you know who I am? I'll have your job for this. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. No, Vivian, I said quietly. You won't. She blinked, confusion replacing some of the anger on her face. What are you talking about? I straightened my shoulders, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. "You won't have my job, Vivian, because I don't work for anyone else. I own this restaurant." The silence that fell over our little corner of the dining room was deafening. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. Her friends exchanged bewildered glances, clearly unsure how to react. That's impossible," Vivian finally managed to sputter. "You're lying." I shook my head, a small smile playing on my lips. "I'm not," I said. "La Belle Cuisine is mine. I built it from the ground up, with my own hard work and determination. The same qualities you've always looked down on, by the way." Vivian's face had gone pale, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. She looked around wildly, as if seeking confirmation from the other diners. But the people at the surrounding tables, who had been discreetly watching our exchange, quickly averted their eyes. I don't believe you," Vivian said weakly, but I could see the doubt creeping into her eyes. I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion wash over me. "Believe what you want, Vivian," I said. "But the fact remains, this is my restaurant. And while I've tolerated your behavior up until now out of respect for your son, I won't stand for it anymore. You have a choice to make. You can either apologize and enjoy the rest of your meal in peace, or you can leave. It's up to you." For a long moment, Vivian just stared at me, her face a mix of shock, anger, and something that looked almost like fear. I stood my ground, meeting her gaze steadily. I was done backing down, done letting her make me feel small. This was my turf, and it was time Vivian understood that. Finally, she seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her. I think we should go," she said quietly to her friends, who nodded quickly in agreement. As they gathered their things, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Daniel standing beside me, a proud smile on his face. "Well done, boss," he said softly. I watched as Vivian and her friends made their way towards the exit, their earlier bravado completely gone. As they reached the door, Vivian paused, turning back to look at me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of respect in her eyes. But then it was gone, replaced by her usual mask of disdain. As the door closed behind them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had finally stood up to Vivian, finally drawn the line. And in doing so, I had reclaimed not just my restaurant, but a piece of myself. "You okay?" Daniel asked, giving my shoulder a squeeze. I nodded, a smile spreading across my face. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." And as I looked around at the restaurant I had built, at the staff who had become like family, I knew it was true. Whatever challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. Because this was my place, my dream. And no one, not even Vivian, could take that away from me. The aftermath of Vivian's departure left a palpable tension in the air. I could feel the eyes of the other diners on me, a mix of curiosity and sympathy in their gazes. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to do next. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to subside, leaving me feeling slightly shaky. Daniel, ever the professional, quickly stepped in. "Why don't you take a few minutes in the office?" he suggested quietly. "I'll handle things out here." I nodded gratefully, suddenly aware of how much I needed a moment to collect myself. As I made my way to the back of the restaurant, I could hear the gentle hum of conversation starting up again. Life in La Belle Cuisine was returning to normal. In the quiet of my small office, I sank into my chair, letting out a long, shaky breath. The events of the evening played through my mind on a loop. Had I done the right thing? Should I have revealed my ownership of the restaurant? The doubts started to creep in, as they often did in moments of quiet reflection. A soft knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called out, straightening up in my chair. Marco, our head chef, poked his head in. "Hey, boss," he said, his usually cheerful face etched with concern. "You okay? I heard there was some drama out front." I managed a small smile. "Yeah, I'm okay. Just a difficult customer." Marco raised an eyebrow. "Must have been some customer to rattle you like this. Want to talk about it?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Marco came in, closing the door behind him and settling into the chair across from me. As I recounted the evening's events, Marco listened attentively, his expression shifting from concern to anger to pride. "Wow," he said when I finished. "I can't believe you put up with that for so long. But I'm glad you finally stood up to her. You should be proud, Sophia." His words warmed me, chasing away some of the lingering doubts. "Thanks, Marco. I just hope I didn't make things worse." Marco shook his head emphatically. "No way. You did what you had to do. And hey, if she ever comes back, I'll personally make sure her food is extra special." I couldn't help but laugh at that, feeling some of the tension leave my body. "Thanks, but I think we'd better stick to our usual high standards. Even for difficult customers." Just then, there was another knock on the door. Daniel entered, his face serious. "Sorry to interrupt," he said, "but we have a situation out front." My heart sank. "Vivian's back?" Daniel shook his head. "No, but, well, you'd better come see for yourself." Exchanging a worried glance with Marco, I stood up and followed Daniel back to the dining room. As we approached, I could hear a man's voice, loud and agitated. "I demand to speak to the manager right now," the voice boomed. "This is unacceptable." As we rounded the corner, I saw the source of the commotion. A tall, well-dressed man was standing at the hostess stand, his face red with anger. Behind him, looking embarrassed and uncomfortable, stood Vivian and her two friends. My stomach dropped. I should have known Vivian wouldn't let this go so easily. "I'm the manager," Daniel said smoothly, stepping forward. "How can I help you, sir?" The man turned to Daniel, his eyes blazing. "Are you aware of how your staff treated my mother-in-law and her friends this evening?" "Ah," I thought. This must be Charles, Vivian's son and my soon-to-be ex-husband. I hadn't seen him in months, not since he'd walked out on our marriage. Seeing him now, standing there in his expensive suit, defending Vivian of all people, I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, hurt, and oddly enough, a twinge of pity. Daniel, to his credit, remained calm and professional. "I'm aware that there was a misunderstanding earlier this evening, sir. Perhaps we could discuss this in private." But Charles wasn't having it. "A misunderstanding," he scoffed. "Your waitress," he spat the word like it was dirty, insulted and humiliated my mother. "I want her fired immediately." I felt a surge of anger at his words. After everything Vivian had said and done, he had the audacity to demand I be fired. Before I could stop myself, I stepped forward. "That won't be necessary," I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside me. Charles whirled around, his eyes widening in surprise when he saw me. "Sophia, what are you doing here?" I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. "I work here, Charles. In fact, I own this restaurant." The silence that followed my statement was deafening. Charles stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Behind him, I could see Vivian's face turning an interesting shade of purple. That's impossible," Charles finally sputtered. "You never said anything about owning a restaurant." "There's a lot I never said," I replied, surprised at how calm I felt. "But that doesn't change the facts. La Belle Cuisine is mine. I built it from the ground up while you were busy climbing the corporate ladder." Charles looked around wildly, as if seeking confirmation from someone, anyone. The other diners quickly averted their eyes, suddenly very interested in their meals. But you can't," Charles stammered. "I can, and I did," I said firmly. "Now, I think it's time for you and your family to leave. You're disturbing our other guests." For a moment, I thought Charles might argue further. But then, to my surprise, his shoulders slumped. He suddenly looked tired, defeated. "Come on, Mother," he said quietly to Vivian. "Let's go." As they turned to leave, I felt a small pang of something. Regret. Nostalgia. I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to say one more thing. "Charles," I called out. He paused, looking back at me. "I'm sorry it ended this way. I truly am. But I'm not sorry for building this place, for making something of myself. I hope someday you can understand that." He held my gaze for a long moment, and I thought I saw a flicker of something, respect, maybe, in his eyes. Then he nodded once, turned, and walked out the door, Vivian and her friends trailing behind him. As the door closed behind them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Finally, truly over. Daniel approached me, concern etched on his face. "You okay, boss?" I nodded, surprised to find that I actually was. "Yeah, I think I am." Just then, a smattering of applause broke out in the dining room. I looked around, startled, to see our guests smiling and clapping. The elderly couple I'd helped earlier raised their glasses to me, and the group of young professionals gave me a thumbs up. I felt a blush creep up my cheeks, but also a warmth in my chest. This was my place, my family. And they had my back. Marco appeared at my side, grinning from ear to ear. "So," he said, "I'm thinking we need a new special. How about we call it the Boss's Revenge? Extra spicy, of course." I couldn't help but laugh, the last of the tension draining away. "I think we can come up with something a little more subtle," I said, smiling. "But I like where your head's at." As we made our way back to the kitchen, discussing potential new menu items and laughing at Marco's increasingly outrageous suggestions, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The night had been a roller coaster, full of ups and downs, but I'd come out stronger on the other side. La Belle Cuisine was more than just a restaurant to me. It was a symbol of everything I'd accomplished, everything I'd overcome. And no one, not Vivian, not Charles, not anyone, could take that away from me. As I tied my apron back on, ready to dive back into the hustle and bustle of the kitchen, I smiled to myself. This was where I belonged. This was home. And I couldn't wait to see what the rest of the night, and the future, had in store. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. After the drama with Vivian and Charles, I threw myself into work with renewed vigor. There was something therapeutic about losing myself in the rhythm of the kitchen, the sizzle of pans, and the artful plating of dishes. As the night wound down and the last of our patrons trickled out, I found myself in the quiet of the empty dining room, wiping down tables and straightening chairs. It was a task I could have easily delegated, but there was something comforting about these simple, repetitive motions. "You know, we have staff for that," Daniel's voice broke through my reverie. I looked up to see him leaning against the bar, a gentle smile on his face. I shrugged, continuing my work. "I know. But sometimes it's nice to get back to basics, you know?" Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. He'd been with me since the beginning, had seen La Belle Cuisine grow from a pipe dream to the successful restaurant it was today. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from him. For a moment, I hesitated. But then I realized that if there was anyone I could open up to about this, it was Daniel. I set down my cleaning cloth and joined him at the bar. "I just can't believe how this night turned out," I said, shaking my head. "Vivian, Charles, it's like the past came back to haunt me all at once." Daniel poured us each a small glass of wine, a rich, full-bodied red that we usually reserved for special occasions. "You handled it beautifully," he said, sliding one glass towards me. I've never seen Vivian look so shocked. I couldn't help but chuckle at the memory of Vivian's face when I revealed I was the owner. It felt good, I admitted. After all these years of her looking down on me, treating me like I was nothing, it felt good to finally stand up for myself. "You should be proud," Daniel said, raising his glass in a toast. "You've built something amazing here, Sophia. And tonight, you showed everyone just how strong you really are." I clinked my glass against his, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. "Thanks, Daniel. I couldn't have done it without you, you know." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping our wine and reflecting on the events of the evening. Finally, Daniel spoke up again. "So, what happens now?" I sighed, swirling the remaining wine in my glass. "I don't know. I mean, the divorce was already in progress, but after tonight, I think it might get messy." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Well, whatever happens, you know we've got your back. The whole team does." His words brought a lump to my throat. I looked around the restaurant, thinking of all the people who had become like family to me over the years. Marco with his infectious laugh and culinary genius. Sarah, our newest waitress, who had blossomed from a shy college student into a confident young woman. Even grumpy old Joe, our dishwasher, who pretended to hate everyone but always had a soft spot for stray cats and down-on-their-luck busboys. I know, I said softly. And I can't tell you how much that means to me. Just then, the kitchen door swung open, and Marco emerged, still wearing his chef's whites. "Hey, boss," he called out. "Got a minute?" I nodded, gesturing for him to join us. Marco pulled up a chair, his usual jovial expression replaced by something more serious. "I just wanted to check in," he said. "After everything that went down tonight, well, the kitchen staff are talking. They're worried about you." I felt a pang of guilt. In all the chaos, I hadn't stopped to think about how the evening's events might have affected my team. "I'm sorry," I said. "I never meant to bring my personal drama into work like that." Marco shook his head emphatically. No, that's not it at all. They're not upset with you. They're upset with Vivian and Charles. In fact," he paused, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I had to talk Joey out of adding some special ingredients to their food, if you know what I mean." Despite everything, I couldn't help but laugh. Joey, our saucier, had always been fiercely protective of the kitchen staff. The idea of him wanting to exact culinary revenge on my behalf was both touching and hilarious. "Well, I appreciate the sentiment," I said, still chuckling. "But maybe we should stick to our usual high standards, even for difficult customers." Marco grinned. "That's what I told him. But seriously, Sophia, the team wants you to know they've got your back. You're not just our boss. You're our friend." I felt my eyes welling up with tears, overwhelmed by the show of support. "Thank you," I managed to say. "That means more to me than you know." We sat there for a while longer, the three of us, sharing stories and laughs. As the night wore on, other staff members drifted in: Sarah, fresh from changing out of her uniform; Joe, his perpetual scowl softened by concern; even MIA, our pastry chef who usually rushed home to her young kids. Before I knew it, the bar area had turned into an impromptu staff meeting. But instead of discussing shift schedules or menu changes, we were talking about family, about standing up for ourselves, about the bonds we'd formed in this little restaurant. As I looked around at these faces, some I'd known for years, others relatively new but no less dear, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Yes, the night had been chaotic. Yes, there were still challenges ahead. But I wasn't facing them alone. "You know," Sarah piped up, a thoughtful expression on her face, "I always wondered why you never told anyone you were the owner. I mean, if it were me, I'd want everyone to know." I smiled, considering her question. "I guess. I wanted to earn respect based on my work, not my title. And I wanted to really understand every aspect of the restaurant, from the ground up." Joe, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "Well, you've certainly done that. Never met an owner who could jump in and wash dishes as well as you can." Everyone laughed, and I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "High praise indeed, coming from you, Joe," I teased. As the laughter died down, Daniel raised his glass. "To Sophia," he said, his voice warm with affection. "The best boss and friend any of us could ask for." "To Sophia," the others echoed, raising their own glasses. I looked around at these wonderful people, my heart full to bursting. "To all of us," I said softly. "To La Belle Cuisine." As we clinked glasses, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, whether from Vivian, Charles, or anyone else, I could face them. Because I had something they could never take away, a family of my own choosing, bound together by hard work, shared dreams, and the special magic that happens in a bustling kitchen on a busy night. The future might be uncertain, but in that moment, surrounded by the warmth and love of my team, I felt ready for anything. La Belle Cuisine wasn't just my restaurant. It was our home. And together, we could weather any storm. As the impromptu gathering began to wind down, with staff members drifting off home one by one, I found myself alone again in the quiet restaurant. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't lonely or oppressive. Instead, it felt like a gentle reminder of all we had built here, all we had overcome. I walked through the dining room one last time, running my hand along the smooth wooden tables, breathing in the lingering sense of the evening's culinary creations. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new menus to plan, new customers to impress. But for now, in this moment, everything was perfect. As I switched off the lights and locked the door behind me, I couldn't help but smile. La Belle Cuisine might have started as my dream, but it had grown into something so much more. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, of following your passion, of surrounding yourself with people who believe in you. And as I walked home under the starlit sky, I felt a sense of excitement building inside me. Because I knew that whatever tomorrow might bring, I was ready to face it, with my head held high, my team by my side, and the spirit of La Belle Cuisine burning bright in my heart. The next morning, I woke up feeling surprisingly refreshed. Despite the emotional rollercoaster of the previous night, I had slept soundly, buoyed by the warmth and support of my team. As I went through my morning routine, I couldn't help but smile, thinking about how lucky I was to have such incredible people in my life. I arrived at La Belle Cuisine earlier than usual, eager to get a head start on the day. As I unlocked the front door, the familiar sense of the restaurant welcomed me home. I breathed in deeply, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. This was where I belonged. As I walked through the dining room, straightening chairs and adjusting table settings, I replayed the events of the previous night in my mind. The confrontation with Vivian, the shocking appearance of Charles, the impromptu staff gathering, it all felt like a dream now. But the emotions were still very real. I was so lost in thought that I almost didn't hear the knock on the front door. Glancing at my watch, I frowned. We weren't due to open for hours yet. Who could it be? As I approached the door, my heart skipped a beat. Through the glass, I could see Vivian standing there, looking uncharacteristically nervous. For a moment, I considered pretending I hadn't seen her. But then I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. "Vivian," I said, my voice calm and steady. "This is a surprise." She fidgeted with her handbag, not quite meeting my eyes. "Sophia," she said, her usual haughty tone notably absent. I was hoping we could talk." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside to let her in. As she walked past me into the restaurant, I caught a whiff of her expensive perfume, the same scent she'd worn to every family dinner, every holiday gathering. It brought back a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, more out of habit than anything else. Vivian nodded, seemingly grateful for the offer. As I busied myself with the coffee maker, she took a seat at the bar, her eyes roaming over the restaurant as if seeing it for the first time. "It's a beautiful place," she said softly. "You've done well for yourself, Sophia." I nearly dropped the coffee pot in surprise. In all the years I'd known her, I couldn't remember Vivian ever giving me a genuine compliment. I turned to look at her, trying to gauge her sincerity. "Thank you," I said cautiously. "That means a lot, coming from you." We lapsed into silence as I finished preparing the coffee. When I placed a steaming mug in front of her, Vivian wrapped her hands around it, staring into the dark liquid as if it held the answers to all of life's questions. "I owe you an apology," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. I leaned against the counter, my own coffee forgotten. "Oh," was all I could manage to say. Vivian took a deep breath, as if steeling herself. "The way I treated you last night, the way I've treated you for years, it was inexcusable. I was cruel and judgmental, and I'm truly sorry." I stood there, stunned into silence. Of all the ways I'd imagined this conversation going, this wasn't one of them. Vivian looked up at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've always prided myself on being a good judge of character," she continued. "But I was so wrong about you, Sophia. I let my own prejudices and insecurities cloud my judgment. I saw your kindness as weakness, your hard work as desperation. I couldn't have been more mistaken." I felt a lump forming in my throat. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Vivian sighed, running a hand through her perfectly coiffed hair. "After you left last night, Charles and I had a long talk. He told me everything. About how you supported him through law school, how you built this restaurant from nothing while he was busy climbing the corporate ladder. He told me about all the times you tried to reach out to me, to build a relationship, and how I shut you down at every turn." She paused, taking a sip of her coffee. I realized that I've been so caught up in my own world, my own expectations, that I never bothered to see who you really are. And I'm ashamed of that, Sophia. Truly ashamed. I felt tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. All those years of trying to win Vivian's approval, of hoping she'd see me as more than just the girl who wasn't good enough for her son, it all came rushing back. I appreciate you saying that, Vivian, I said softly. But why now? What's changed? Vivian looked at me, a sad smile on her face. I saw how your staff rallied around you last night. I saw the respect in their eyes, the loyalty. And I realized that you've built something here that goes beyond just a successful business. You've created a family. She paused, her voice growing softer. And I realized that's something I've never managed to do. For all my social standing, all my so-called friends, I don't have what you have here. And that made me take a hard look at myself and my choices. I felt a wave of empathy wash over me. For the first time, I saw Vivian not as the intimidating matriarch, but as a woman who had built her life around appearances and expectations, perhaps at the cost of genuine connections. It's never too late to change, Vivian, I said gently. She nodded, wiping away a stray tear. I hope you're right. And I hope it's not too late for us to start over. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'd like the chance to try and make amends. I took a deep breath, considering her words. Part of me wanted to hold on to the anger, the hurt of all those years of rejection. But another part of me, the part that had built La Belle Cuisine on the principles of second chances and new beginnings, knew what I had to do. I'd like that, I said finally. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But I'm willing to try if you are. The relief on Vivian's face was palpable. Thank you, Sophia, she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. Thank you for giving me this chance. Just then, the back door opened, and Marco's voice called out, Hey boss, you in here? I had some ideas for the new menu and, oh. He stopped short as he came into the dining room, his eyes widening as he took in the scene before him. I could see him tensing up, ready to come to my defense if needed. It's okay, Marco, I said, smiling reassuringly. Vivian and I were just having a chat. In fact, why don't you join us? I'd love to hear your ideas for the new menu. Marco looked between Vivian and me, confusion evident on his face. But he nodded, pulling up a chair. Well, I was thinking we could do a fusion of classic French techniques with some local ingredients. You know, really showcase the best of both worlds. As Marco launched into his pitch, his enthusiasm infectious as always, I couldn't help but marvel at the strange turns life can take. Here we were, me, my once nemesis of a mother-in-law, and my passionate head chef, sitting around the bar of my restaurant, discussing menu ideas like it was the most natural thing in the world. And in that moment, I felt a sense of hope blooming in my chest. Hope for new beginnings, for healing old wounds, for building bridges where there were once only walls. As the morning wore on and more staff began to arrive, each reacting with varying degrees of shock to Vivian's presence, I couldn't help but smile. La Belle Cuisine had always been about more than just food. It was about bringing people together, about creating a space where everyone was welcome, where second chances were always on the menu. And as I watched Vivian slowly but surely begin to open up to my staff, asking questions about their roles and listening with genuine interest to their stories, I knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for me and Vivian, but for all of us at La Belle Cuisine. The road ahead might not be easy, but I was ready for whatever came next. Because now I knew, without a doubt, that I had the strength to face any challenge. And more importantly, I had a family, both by blood and by choice, to stand beside me every step of the way. As the first customers of the day began to trickle in, I tied on my apron and got ready to face another day in the restaurant I loved. But this time, I did so with a lighter heart and a renewed sense of purpose. The tables had turned, indeed. And I couldn't wait to see where this new journey would take us all.